Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I decided it was time to do another analysis because it's been a while. And I finished Banana Fish 5 days ago. And a part of me wanted to record something right after finishing it, but then it was one of those shows that I feel like you kind of almost have to like meld over and really think about. So in this one I'm going to analyze it a bit, and I'm going to go over the ending especially and why I thought the ending was actually really good. So if you haven't seen it yet, spoilers, and if you're thinking about seeing it, it is really, really good. I highly recommend it. It has this cool mix of like a thriller, being on the edge of your seat, you know, kind of like that Attack on Titan-esque situation. And also similar to Attack on Titan, that it will definitely pull at your heartstrings, but then there's also this other element of the show that I would almost say is like a Fruits Basket. So it's kind of like Fruits Basket meets Attack on Titan or something like that. So that's a little bit of information if you you are considering watching the show. It's really good. If you guys want, you know, a non-spoilery review, I can do that, so just let me know. But yeah, for this one I wanted to talk about the ending and also the beginning. So, you know, the very beginning of the show, I was immediately, and I haven't heard anyone else talk about this, but I was immediately reminded of the movie West Side Story, the 1961 version, because I've learned there's a new version out too. And what I mean by that is, so it's the story of Romeo and Juliet, but it's set in a, at the time, contemporary setting in New York. And, you know, it covers gang violence and sort of the way that, you know, gangs function in a group and you know, the issues that arise from that and finding love in between all the gangs. So, you know, I think that if you like Banana Fish, you might like the musical. It is a musical, but it just, I don't know, something about Banana Fish when it started, I was immediately drawn to West Side Story, a movie I hadn't thought about in years, but was obsessed with as a teenager, like obsessed. I think I've always really sort of been drawn to this idea of like this ultimate love, but it's like a tragedy, which is funny because I definitely don't want that for my own life. I prefer if my husband did not die in a tragic accident. So yeah, but I've always found that story element very interesting of like, you know, you give up everything for this person, or you're, you know, you would do anything for this person, but then sometimes even if it's a true real love, like fate or you know, circumstances outside of our control can cause it to end. And I always found that really fascinating, especially as a teenager, but even now, like how you can really care about someone, they can really care about you, but if the stars don't align, it can be really difficult or impossible. So yeah, anyways, I was immediately drawn to the connection between those two things, and I thought, this is going to be interesting, and this is going to be a tragedy. I don't know how, and I knew also, I had heard that it was sad, but like something about it reminding me of West Side Story, I was like, okay, like, so this is going to be, even without hearing that, I kind of was like, this is going to be not just sad, but a tragedy. Like I just had this feeling. And then, of course, I forget his name, but the cute little kid dies, and that was really sad. And then, you know, you see Ash, and you can just tell, I think, from the beginning that he's a really, like, hurt soul. Like, a lot has happened to him, and he's an old soul, too, you know what I mean? Like, I think he's 17, but he's not 17. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's 17, but he's been through so many things that, luckily, a lot of 17-year-olds don't experience, but I mean, that also means he's very isolated because a lot of people haven't gone through those negative experiences, and so that makes it hard for him to connect. So he's in this sort of like situation where he has to be a leader. He has to be like portray that he's strong. He can't talk about any of the stuff that's happened. And then he's also under the thumb of, you know, the boss, the guy. So yeah, I found that really fascinating. And I think what people maybe miss, I think, in this story is it's a story of survival. Ash is not out of the traumatic, abusive situation when we meet him. So it's like, okay, this isn't a story of, I don't know, it's not a story of growth per se, in terms of, it is, but it's not in terms of like he's going to be working on his psyche and he's going to be able to, you know, heal from everything, because he's still in it, right? If you're still, let's say you've kind of broken away from an abusive situation, but let's say you're in an, like, we can do the metaphor, but on and off relationship, right? And it's like an abusive relationship. So Ash is almost to that point where, or it could be parents too. Maybe he, you know, a person has been able to get away from their abusive parents, but then they have to come back every once in a while because of economic reasons. Or the parents, you know, unfortunately have leverage for some reason, right? Which is very, very common. So they're coming back, they're leaving. They may not be in the same situation they were in before, but they're still feeling trapped. They're still dealing with the abuse in a way. They're still dealing with that feeling of, this person has power over my life. And I think that's where Ash is in the story, is he feels like that guy still has, and he does, he still is enjoying having this leverage and power over Ash's life, even if Ash has gotten more freedom and responsibility. So Ash can't really heal from that with AG or anything, because, or AG, because he's still wrapped up in this situation. So I think it's interesting because I see the story in two different ways. I see it literally, okay? And I also see it metaphorically. And the metaphor is completely mine. I have no idea if the author meant it in this metaphor, so it's just kind of like my interpretation. I thought maybe you guys would find interesting, but because I saw so many connections between getting out of an abusive, especially parent-child relationship, and this show. So yeah. So I think I look at the ending, like I was saying, in also in two different ways. So in the more literal way, it's kind of this, it's heartbreaking, but it's this beautiful tragedy. You can talk about this too still in the literal sense. First of all, I think the absolute worst ending would have been, and this is what I was worried about actually, was that Ash was going to be under control of the main guy and be on those drugs, or just be like this sort of lifeless form of himself, or, you know, have to be selling banana fish for the rest of his life. I was genuinely worried that that was going to be the ending, and I think for Ash, that's the scariest ending of all. I think for Ash, the worst ending, and to me, the absolute worst ending was the rest of his life. He's trapped and he has to be in this abusive situation, and he has to sell something that killed his brother, or he's just a shell of a person the rest of his life. So that, I think, is the absolute worst ending. This is like still a really sad ending though, don't get me wrong. And so, like I was saying, it's kind of a beautiful tragedy, because him and AG both know that they love each other. He's reading AG's letter, and that's one of the last thoughts he has before he's stabbed, and when he eventually dies. You know, he's reading his letter, and the person comes in the library and says, oh, you know, he's having, which I know some people say he might have lived, which would be great, honestly. I'd be fine with it. But with the interpretation that I kind of get from it, you know, the person comes up to the library and says, oh, he's having a really pleasant sleep or pleasant dream. And I like the idea that if he did have to die, that like at least he knew that someone really loved him. I don't think he had ever, it makes me sad, I don't think he'd ever really been truly loved in such a deep way until Eiji came into his life. By his family, or by his, you know, adopted family, or even by his friends, even though his friends were probably the closest thing before Eiji, I think. So I think in a way that was beautiful. And it made sense too that you know, I don't think you can escape gang violence or being involved in that world easily. So even if he went to Japan, it seemed like, you know, this is an international story. If there were people from China who were involved in the gangs in Banana Fish, it also stands to reason there would have been people in Japan. So, you know, I think he was he wanted Eiji to live his own life and to be happy, and I think he truly loved him, you know. So it's sad. And I think Eiji truly loved Ash. It really is a beautiful love story. And I do like thinking about alternative endings, like they would have ended up together or whatever, but the truth of the matter is we don't know how it would have ended up, I don't think. I think they seem like the type that, you know, are kind of soulmates, you know. I think they probably would have gotten through stuff for sure, but I think they would have had to go to couples therapy because, like I was saying, Ash has been trying to survive this whole time. He hasn't really gotten to heal yet. And he's healed some, I think, from Eiji's love, but there's things trauma that he hasn't even processed. Like there was this one scene he was talking to the journalist's wife or ex-wife or whatever. And he was talking, it's you know, it took me 6 months to get over that. I mean, it takes probably longer a lot of the time even. And you know, Ash responds saying, you know, I don't have the luxury of thinking about that. He was, what was it, like 7 or 8? So I don't think he ever really has had the chance to process it because he's been in survival mode. So even when he was, let's say, out of the prostitution part of the situation, well, he was still under the thumb of the guy who was making it happen. So I think in his mind, he was probably thinking this could happen at any moment. So if that's true, it doesn't make sense to process everything you're going through because it's just going to happen again. And then it's going to be even more, he's going to be even more aware. And it's going to be even more painful. So I don't think he ever processed all of that. Which I think is also why him and Eiji probably would have eventually gotten to the point of things happening, but I don't think it would have taken a long time because Ash has always seen, you know, romantic things as not romantic because they weren't. He's seen them as violations of himself. So there's the more literal side. Oh, and we should probably finish with why I like the ending literally instead of just the trauma stuff. So yeah, literally I like the ending because I think it's kind of, it's realistic. Like it's sad but it also it makes sense with the story. I think the story was always meant to be a tragedy. It has that sort of, like I was saying, Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story element that, and the ending is so sad. And I think it really makes you think about Ash's life. It makes you think about, you know, just the whole story. And I think it puts it in a different light than if he had lived. I think it makes us more reflective of everything that happened to him and the tragedy of the entire story. Now, on a more optimistic, well, still sad, it doesn't solve the ending, but more metaphorical, I guess, way of viewing it to me is I kind of like viewing it as a metaphor for how it is when you're getting out of an abusive, especially I'd say family or someone, or it could be like a spouse, someone who has control over your life situation, right? Because Ash basically has to blow up his entire world to get out of the situation with the one guy, right? That guy has control over not just Ash's, I don't know, financial life at the beginning, but he also has control over Ash's whole world. Ash is meeting with him every week. He's the one in charge of the underworld, if you will. So, you know, Ash really has to basically go against him very aggressively, tell him no, in a world that, you know, it's going to be really hard for him to do that without repercussions, if you will. And I would say the guy who, you know, controls him, he's definitely, to me, seems like a narcissist. Because whenever you see him talk about Ash, he's saying, I raised him. He's so accomplished because of the way I raised him. And he always says how, you know, he wants to be the one to kill Ash, as this sense of pride. He wants to be the one to break Ash, and no one else can break Ash but this guy. And it's a very messed up and narcissistic way of looking at people. Obviously. So, you know, Ash is dealing with this guy who wants to break him, right? It's malicious intent. He doesn't just want Ash to come back home, right? He wants to use Ash, abuse Ash, and feel like he's in control of Ash. He uses Ash as a tool. So Ash, you know, like I said, he has to build up the world. He has to basically get all these gangs together. He has to figure out the story of Banana Fish, which is this whole other thing I haven't even really covered in, you know, this. His brother ends up dying. Like, all these things happen. And the biggest thing, of course, I think, is that scenario with Shorter and Ash and AG. And it makes complete sense to me that a narcissistic abuser would put someone like Ash in that situation, where he says, Ash, betray your friends. Pick someone, but not really, right? Because he has to betray someone. And the gross thing about it is it's put into this way where it's framed in this way where it's like, Ash, you're making the choice. You're the one doing this, Ash, you know, right? But it's the guy. And I'm sorry I keep calling him the guy, but I didn't want to memorize his name because he sucks. I'll put it in the thing though, I promise. So yeah, Shorter ends up dying. But what else could Ash have done, right? Like, if you were in that situation, it was a no-win situation. Shorter has been given the drug. We don't know if Shorter is ever going to be able to be himself again. He's terrified of AG. AG is, you know, at least hasn't been given the drug. So if you're given the choice, it makes sense you would save AG, because Shorter literally might die from the drug, or he might never, you know, he might want to die from the drug because of the brainwashing and the way it works, and the miserable, you know, and Ash has seen his own brother become basically like a shell of who he was. So it makes sense. So, you know, and I don't think the guy is ever redeemed. Like, I know people have said that, and I understand what they're trying to say when he shoots the guy trying to kill the military guy who raped Ash. But remember, this guy also raped Ash. This guy just wanted to own Ash. He may have done a good thing by saving Ash. He didn't really want Ash to die. But he psychologically tortured Ash for basically his entire childhood and his whole life, basically, right? So I don't think to me, he doesn't get a free pass. Like, was it a nice action? Yes, but that doesn't erase everything he did. And I think that's the thing about abusers, is like, they could, like with Ash, right, or with a person and their parents, if your parents are, again, not a psychologist, so take this all with a grain of salt, but, you know, if your parents are abusers, and they might do one nice thing every once in a while. This is metaphorical again, of course, right? They might change their ways every once in a while. But does that change the person and their abusive ways and whatever, unless they're, you know, going to therapy and all of this stuff, right, to really work on their issues? And even then, you know, depends on the person. So I would say no. But yeah, like, it makes sense that the guy is very vengeful, right? He basically wants to break Ash when Ash breaks away. He tries to destroy his friends, any sort of outside relationships Ash has. So I think it might have been even more powerful if Ash had been the one to kill him, or if, you know, he had gone out of the picture due to Ash's actions. But I still think that the story is very powerful, because the metaphor I see is when the abuser is gone from your life. So in this case, he dies, right, in the story. The abuser is gone. Well, you still have to process everything that happened. And I think from trauma, right, usually I think trauma people who've experienced trauma will agree with this. A part of you, the old you, has to die to make way for the new you, right? Like, you've learned things you can't come back from, right? There's no going back to the age of innocence or the age of not knowing that people can be this way. It's here, we know it, it's staying. So in order to process everything and move on, that part of you dies. So the metaphor I see is Ash dying is like the old him dying and a new him living on, which I know doesn't really work because he's still dead in the story, but just metaphorically, I kind of see that, like, as it's true that I think, not always, obviously I'm not going to speak for everyone who's experienced trauma, and again, not a psychologist, so this is just, again, more of a literary sort of metaphor thing, but, you know, when you leave that kind of situation, a part of you dies, and a new part of you grows, and you become a new person. And, you know, maybe a wiser person, right? And you learn things. And so it's not all negative, it can also be positive. But yeah, I thought that was kind of a really, I don't know, cool metaphor in the story. So yeah, I see it as both a metaphor for getting out of an abusive situation, the whole story. But of course, in the metaphor, you would live on to better days and brighter days and all of that. And in that metaphor, I like to think of it like Ash was just sleeping. But in the more literal sense, that side of the story, I do see it as like a Romeo and Juliet or a West Side Story fairy tale. And then, of course, there's my imagination of the third ending, which is, oh, everyone's happy and Ash and Eiji go to Japan. And, you know, I would love an alternate ending just for fun, but I understand, you know. I think the author did a great job making a tragedy. I think it's a beautiful tragedy, and it's one I'm going to be thinking about for a very, very long time. Yeah, a really good anime. 10 out of 10 for me. And the music, like the lyrics in every opening and every ending of the show, which I know are only 4, but still they're perfection, and the animation and just everything, I think, for how the story goes is just really, really good. So, whew, anyways, what did you guys think of Banana Fish? Do you agree or disagree with my analysis? It's okay if you disagree. I know I kind of went out there on a limb, so thanks for watching. Let me know too, I was considering, should my analysis videos be me talking, or would you guys enjoy it more if I did what I know a lot of people do, where they have like a video and images more and music, which I can try. I know there's copyright that I sometimes run into, but I could at least try one and see how it goes. So let me know about that. Please consider liking and subscribing if you like these videos. Also, let me know if you like analysis videos and what kind you want to see, because the reactions, I feel like I do tend to get more feedback about what people like and don't like. So, excuse me, analysis people, if you do have feedback and you feel comfortable sharing, please let me know, because otherwise I'm just gonna keep guessing. Also let me know what I should watch next. Oh, a recommendation for you guys if you just finished Banana Fish is Chihaya Furu. It's another love story, but it's very wholesome and like just really sweet, and it's about a girl who plays card games. It's a josei. So I think it's kind of it's been a nice detox from Banana Fish and Attack on Titan, which I will be reacting to soon. So yeah, thank you guys again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.